Go ahead and start this. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar of Building the Intelligent Enterprise. My name is Sherry Moore. I'm part of the business development team here at Executive Education, and I'm happy to introduce Hettie Tabor, who is the director of our Master of Business Analytics program at SMU and a seasoned senior executive with 25 and 26 years of experience in information technology and 21 years of practical SAP implementation experience. Hettie has Accenture's SAP Business Analytics Global Practice Lead, or she was, and a wealth of technical and project management knowledge in the SAP Business Intelligence, HANA, Business Objects, Business Planning, Consolidation, and Data Management space. And Hettie's been recognized as Accenture's leading expert on business analytics for SAP clients. So we're thrilled to have her today to introduce this new program that we're kicking off, Building the Intelligent Enterprise. And so I'll turn it over to Hettie now and we can get started.
Great, thanks, Jerry. That all sounded really impressive for me. So that's great. Basically, in a nutshell, I worked for Accenture for 26 years, ran their global SAP analytics practice, and then retired early and came to work at SMU, and I now direct the Masters of Science in Business Analytics program at SMU, still getting to do what I love, which is analytics, but getting it to do it on a more relaxed basis, except for this year, which is crazy, as you guys all know. But we wanted to bring to you this idea of building the intelligent enterprise to kind of talk about next steps as a lot of people are moving towards more decisive analytics in what they're doing. So, hold on. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about the two-day event that we're going to have, but I wanted to introduce the speakers to you. So this is the event that's coming up in November. So if you're interested in joining for us, Sherry will actually talk about at the end how to do that. I will be the moderator and host for the event. I tend to kibitz, give unwanted advice every time I can. So you'll find that I speak a lot at these types of events, even if I'm not a primary speaker. So I just tend to put myself in the middle of everything. We also have Brian Smith. He's going to talk mostly about kind of machine learning and AI from an introductory perspective, but also, you know, what are some of the myths that are associated with that? So Brian, do you want to take a second and just introduce yourself to the group?
Absolutely. So my name is Brian Smith. I'm a Global Technology Director at Databricks. I work with primarily retail and CPG manufacturers to implement AI and machine learning solutions in their enterprise. And that's what we'll be discussing there.
Great. And then next we have Travis Grubbs. He's going to talk about a little around organization for teams for machine learning and AI. Travis, would you like to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Hettie. I'm Travis Grubbs. I work with a company called Sparkhound, which is a boutique consulting company mostly focused on helping customers digitally automate, and data and analytics is a big part of that. So excited to be part of this.
Great, thanks, Travis. And next we have Jeff Johnson. Jeff's going to talk about how you get started with machine learning and AI. So Jeff, can you introduce yourself?
You bet. So Jeff Johnston, I'm a principal at Artist Consulting, and I also am an adjunct professor at SMU, been 12 years at Artist, and before that had a background in software development. But we deliver solutions along the BI, AI and ML, and big data space. And we'll be talking about getting started with machine learning and AI projects, evaluating those outcomes, managing budgets. What's the difference between mode 1 and mode 2 technology models with that, and also some considerations around insourcing versus outsourcing when it comes to machine learning and AI as well.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I apologize for missing the T in your name. I sent it to your review, so I think you missed that too. Finally, we have Jeff Metal. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to be here. So my name is Jeff Metal. I've been in the analytics space for 10 plus years. I'm currently with Atlassian. We'll be talking quite a bit about the long-term implications of ML and AI. It's an explosively, unbelievably quick growing field. We'll do a deep dive into everything that's changing today and what it's likely to be doing in the next 5, 10, and 15 years to come. Very much looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So let's go ahead and kind of get a little bit of a start on this. So what I wanted to introduce you guys to was what we're planning to do as part of this session that's coming up in November. And really what we're trying to do is do a little demystifying of things like big data and data science, and especially things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, because there's lots of things that are said about it out there. If you guys are working in the analytics space, you've probably heard it if you're not already doing it, meaning artificial intelligence and machine learning, because what we find is companies are dabbling in it, but not necessarily full-fledged into AR ML. So you'll find that we have various definitions of what that means and what people are doing. And so this is a good way to kind of look into that and get a better understanding of what that means. We're also looking at helping you try and figure out how you drive this digital transformation and how you kind of change your organization, but also just what you should be thinking about in terms of moving into this next step in analytics. This also means working with projects, working with people, managing all of those aspects of it, and dealing with some of the ethical implications that we have with this, and getting into some of the advanced analytics around this area. And then finally, just to talk a little bit about how this is changing our society, changing our world overall. And I'll mention some things today, but when we do the session in November, you'll get a chance to kind of hear some stories from each of these guys about what they've seen, what's actually being done out there, and some, kind of how this is changing our world and the world that we live in today. So I just wanted to give a brief, like high level AI, machine learning, and deep learning, just to give you guys an idea of the next generation of analytics and what this is. So if you think that this is something that's new, I will tell you that this has been around for a really long time, but not to a very heavy, deep level extent to what we're seeing today. So artificial intelligence was brought about in the 1950s with some early machine learning that we were doing, or early artificial intelligence that we were doing. And it started to expand and grow. And in the 80s, we started to get into some things like machine learning. And now that we've gotten into 2010 and above, we've started to get into this next breed, which is deep learning. So when I talk about those, well, what do I mean? So I thought I'd just do a little tiny overview here of what that means. And so when we're talking about this, we can kind of break it into pieces. So really, usually when you're talking about artificial intelligence, you have a big umbrella that everything else sits under. So when people say artificial intelligence, realize that that's usually a big umbrella that includes things like machine learning, which includes supervised learning. So things like classification. So if you've ever categorized anything or put things into groups or populations, you're going to see that's machine learning with classification in a supervised level. Many of you have probably worked with decision trees before, or tree-like models that you're doing within some of the programming that you're doing, or some of the analytics that you're doing, and that's all part of supervised as well. And then obviously a lot of us have gotten into regressions and correlations and showing how one object might be dependent or show some variable dependency on other objects that are out there. And then we get into some machine learning that's unsupervised. So many of you may have moved into the k-means clustering or dealing with clustering, being able to put groups. Sometimes it's of people. Typically we see it of people. So that was the neural networks that I was talking about on the right-hand side. So basically it's learning from itself, but it's learning more data. And the more data it has, the machine has, the better it gets at actually learning on its own and using its own brain per se to actually work in that space. I just realized that you can't see me either. So I'm gonna put my video on. It really just knocked me out of everything, didn't it? Okay, so these are the kinds of concepts, and this is just to give you guys a general overview of when we say AI, machine learning, and deep learning, kind of what are we talking about. But then what I wanted to do just was have an idea of some of the examples that you might see in machine learning and some of the stuff that's going on today. So if any of you have used, I don't want to say her name because she's behind me, Alexa, she'll probably ask me what I want. Any type of this artificial or virtual assistant, right? This is a form of artificial intelligence, right? So this is kind of an early stage of this. Google Assistant is another one. Siri is another one, right? So depending on what you use at home, if you use it at all. them listening for their name and information about what they want you to do, and then going up and finding that information. That's a part of what we see as part of artificial intelligence. There's a lot of things that have been done today around facial recognition. My computer, when I get onto my computer, will recognize my face. My phone will recognize my face and then turn on. I found that's true except for early in the morning. Apparently, I do not look like myself early in the morning when I wake up. So I don't know if you have that same problem, but that just says something about me. One of the things I thought was really cool was this company called Blue River Technologies. Heard from them, heard about them. They work with John Deere, and they invented this See and Spray product, which is a recognition not of a face, but of weeds. So it recognizes when something is a weed, and it will spray what it needs to spray. So if it's spraying for weeds and it needs to spray a weed and not a plant that you're actually going to use, then it actually recognizes the weeds and sprays the weeds with pesticide, basically, or insecticide, or weed removers. So it's a really interesting way to do facial recognition in something that's an object. Self-driving cars, obviously we talked about this. If any of you guys have had a chance to drive these quote unquote self-driving cars, I'll tell you that I drove a Tesla not too long ago, the new Tesla Model X, which I'm in absolute love with, and did their automatic pilot, which was very interesting because to allow the car itself to change lanes for you in the middle of traffic on the highway was a pretty amazing thing. So this is definitely a part of what we're using with sensors and understanding who's around you and how to manipulate the car, right, based on not having you at the controls, but obviously you always have to have your hands around just in case. But it's a little scary, but at the same time, this is something that we're seeing as a future wave that we have. There's a couple other things. Providence, which is a healthcare provider, actually has started building an online screening and triage tool that if you go into their site, because of all the stuff, especially with COVID-19, it will ask you a series of questions and go through this without a person there to help determine whether or not what you're suffering from is dealing with COVID-19 or something else, and kind of helps to funnel you to the right place. In the same vein, Tampa General is using infrared systems to separate patients from visitors in a hospital to see if you have a fever when you come in, because especially with COVID-19, one of the signs of this is a fever, and so they're trying to separate you so that they separate patients who might have this from anybody who might be visiting somebody that's there. You probably have seen this too in the Singapore airport. So in the Singapore airport, they have scanners up, infrared systems up that actually look for people and test your temperature when you're in the Singapore airport. So if you didn't know that, your temperature is being taken when you're in the Singapore airport just by looking at infrared systems. And then GPS locators. This was started out in South Korea, which has been really great. You've seen this kind of pop up around the world. It's pseudo available in the US. It's kind of not great in the US right now, but it's really taking a look to see where COVID-19 cases are. So using your computers or your phones actually to detect where you are and where people are around you that might have been infected with this or have it. So it's a tracer basically that allows us to be able to do some things like that. It's being used in Germany right now as well. I have a friend that's over there and they're actually using it as an app on their phone. We have those apps, but those apps aren't quite working the way we want them to here in the US yet. And maybe that's because we have too many cases, but it's when you have smaller number of cases, it can actually track where people are and if you're around people that have been recently diagnosed with COVID-19. And there's lots of government implications to that too, but just some ideas of where machine learning and artificial intelligence has come into play. And we'll talk about some of those types of new products and tools and technologies that are in use today. So I'm gonna have each of these guys, if they're okay with just talking for a minute about what their part of the session is gonna cover. And then at the end, we'll have some time with Q&A if you'd like that. So Brian, you want to talk about what you're going to cover in the morning on day one?
Sure. So we will start off with just kind of a baseline understanding of artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, all these terms that are being thrown around these days. Talk about what we mean when we use those in a marketing context, but also what they actually mean. So if we want to use them to differentiate these different spaces, we can do it. But once we get done with that, I really want to take what Hettie's talked about here is most of us have an interest in this space because of the types of technologies she just described. And so where I work with customers, they're trying to understand, where does this fit in my organization? How do I take these fantastical things, self-driving automobiles, digital assistants, and bring it into my org and have an impact? One of the quotes that I like to refer to is from Jeff Bezos in a letter he sent out to his shareholders in early 2017. And he talks about machine learning and AI are actually fundamental to everything they're doing at Amazon. But it's not this type of high visible, kind of high impact or kind of resonance type AI. It's stuff that he says is, quote, quietly but meaningfully improving core operations. So how can we establish some foundational understandings of where we might bring this into a traditional business? And then what do we need to consider in terms of what specific technologies or capabilities to bring in, and what the challenges might be to adopting those, both technical and organizational. And so that's what we'll focus on that morning.
Great, thanks, Brian. And then in the afternoon of day one, Travis, you want to talk about some of the things you're going to cover?
Sure. Yeah. We're gonna build on what Brian talks about in the morning, and we're going to kind of transition a little bit more to the enterprise and really explore kind of the different ways that companies organize for machine learning and AI, and what they do to become a little bit more kind of an AI powered organization. So we'll look at different life cycles. We'll look at, kind of different approaches. We'll talk about things like data literacy, data governance, and just how companies are culturally changing, where they come from, where they typically kind of like to go in the first and second and third steps. What types of people are generally involved? What roles are critical? We'll talk about some of the gotchas. We'll talk about kind of helping look around the corner and anticipating certain things. We'll talk about just different journeys really that different companies have taken, and ultimately, I think there's more than one right way to get there. And so we'll just share some of those stories and hopefully kind of, identify some things that are familiar with folks and help chart a path in terms of kind of getting the organization ready for AI.
Thank you. All right, and then Jeff Johnston's going to talk about day two and the morning in day two. Jeff, you want to talk about that?
You bet. So, machine learning and AI projects have to be managed a little bit differently than your traditional software development projects or BI projects that you may have had experience with. And so we'll talk through some of those differences. And not only that, but then how do you know, because it is kind of a scientific process, right? You have to go through and try different models, try different algorithms, towards the outcome that you're shooting for. And so how do you evaluate whether or not the machine learning models or AI models that you're using are being successful or not? And so we'll talk through different approaches for evaluating outcomes as it pertains to those models. And then how do you deploy that inside your organization, right? So, are we on premises, are we in the cloud? And then in the cloud, then what are all the different methods and ways that we can deploy these models? And how might that have a business impact on various business processes in your organization? We'll talk about managing budgets, of course, with this process, developing and deploying AI and machine learning models. Talk about whether this is an IT-driven or a business-driven process with the mode 1, mode 2 technology models and the considerations there. Insourcing and outsourcing, we'll talk through what it takes to really bring up a team and get them up to speed and to the level that you need to have to operate efficiently and effectively, and also discuss some of the things to consider when it comes to the types of folks that you may need to have on your team to operate effectively. And then from an overall program perspective, when you're managing your program of different projects, when it comes to AI and machine learning, what are some of the considerations that you need to understand to make that an effective program inside your organization?
And then finally, for day 2 in the afternoon, Jeff Metal is going to talk a little bit about some of the long-term implications of ML and AI.
Absolutely. So just diving into this a little bit, we're going to examine a lot of case studies about what's happening currently with ML and AI. We're definitely getting the long term, but I want to start it by saying what's happening today. I think a lot of people still see these fantastical developments, and how do we frame that? What does that mean if everything, very soon we all get self-driving cars and 25% of trips are done by self-automated vehicles? What implication does that have on the transportation industry? How quickly is that going to transform the societies? I also want to spend quite a bit of time taking these case studies about where ML and AI are headed and put them in an ethical context. We sort of live in a world right now where almost everything we do is digitized. What does that mean when the companies are capturing all of this digital exhaust and building ever more sophisticated, ever more effective machine learning models to target us with ads and influence our behaviors? What does that mean in the context of our own companies and businesses? So I'm very much looking forward to this. I think it'll be a great way to end the session with this very forward-looking view.
And with the sessions that we're doing, just so you know, we're always, this is a great group of people that are kind of brought together for this, because I've known all these guys for years and years, and we are all talkers, and we love to have conversations about this as opposed to just us speaking. So we always look for feedback from the audience and understanding what you're doing, if you're taking any steps into this, and trying to kind of get an idea of where everybody is at in this process. So this is always a great thing, and it's going to be great collaboration amongst the folks that are going to be there, but also with the people that are going to be attending. So we thought we'd take a few minutes and just see if we have any questions or comments or anything that anybody wants to bring up. You're welcome to put your comments into the chat if you want, and then we can have the folks on our panel address those, or if you want to raise your hand. I don't know if, Sherry, we have the ability for them to speak, but I think they can still do chat room, yes?
That's correct. They can do the chat and the Q&A both. So,
Great.
Yeah. So maybe while we're waiting, Hettie, could you describe a little bit about who this class is really designed for and who might benefit most from it? What type of individual and job description would best benefit from this program?
Sure. And I would say it's pretty much open to anyone, but what we're finding is if you're really interested in getting into some of these areas around machine learning and AI, your company's typically done a little bit already in the analytics spaces, is kind of ready to make the next step, or at least is talking about it, right? You may have already dabbled into some of this as well. So you may be looking at it or trying out some new tools or technologies in this space, but maybe you're not quite ready to completely open up to it, or you haven't figured out to, I think Brian's point earlier, where do I want to go with this? What do I want to do with this, right? And so this is to kind of help you put a framework around that, to say, how could you use this for your organization? What type of people do you have to have in your organization to be able to do this type of thing? What kind of tools and technologies are out there? What are some of the myths about people talking about this, right? That may or may not be correct, because we all hear, oh, everybody's doing machine learning and AI, and I'll tell you, majority of companies are not really there yet. They're just starting to get involved in some of this. So if you're already doing standard analytics, if you're doing some predictive analytics, you're really good candidates for this. And so if you're just really trying to understand this space, what it takes to do this space, are just very interested in this space, this is a great place to be. So as your organization is kind of planning and preparing for what they're doing in analytics, this is kind of a next generation type area that you should be considering as you start your work in this space.
Great, thanks. So here's a question. What is some of the most powerful new technologies that are coming on board? And will that be covered in the class? Things you can look forward to.
Yeah, I mentioned some earlier. Do you guys have any others that you've seen that you think are quite kind of cutting edge?
You know, you mentioned deep neural networks, and there's a lot of interest in that space. As a matter of fact, when we talk about the explosion in AI, a lot of it is coming from there. So we'll, in the first module, we'll take a little bit of time to discuss what that is, really as a way to get you oriented about what's different with AI and machine learning relative to something like statistical analysis. But the goal is not to go super deep from a technical perspective, to really look at adoption and organizational considerations for companies that are planning to go down this path.
I think the idea of actually providing some examples of what we've seen is really helpful to a lot of companies when they're trying to figure this out. Anytime I've done analytics with companies in general, usually what we do is, especially for their organization or their group, try and help them figure out what other companies that are in similar industries, similar organizations have done to kind of give you an idea, right? Because sometimes it's just understanding what you can do that helps you figure out what you might do, right? And it doesn't have to be the, self-driving car, right? That may not apply to you, but there may be parts of these tools and technologies that certainly become applicable to the type of industry you're in or work that you do. Are there questions out there? Are you guys interested in this area? Is this something that you're looking forward to? I can't see any of the questions, by the way, Sherry.
Yeah. Well, if you do have questions, at the end of this presentation, we'll have our contact information. So definitely feel like you can shoot those to us, and we'll be happy to forward them on to Hettie and her team and see if we can get some direct answers for you. So moving into the other two remaining slides of the program, we talked about who should apply, the type of leaders that would benefit most from this program, business intelligence, data managers, architects, engineers, and those executives that really want to know where they stand on this adoption curve and what they could look forward to in terms of changing their own perception toward this. And so in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about our calendar. This is the programs that we have remaining or that will be starting in the fall. And we have 4 in September. We have 3 in October. And the program we're highlighting today, Building the Intelligent Enterprise, is November 10th and 11th. So it's a 2-day program. Year-round, we offer custom programs that are designed with senior leaders to help deliver topics that are very important to their leadership teams. So we could blend any of these type of topics into a custom program for a company. But the ones I'm showing here are what we call our open enrollments. So anyone can enroll in these upcoming programs. And I did also want to mention that we don't really know where the COVID world is leading us, and that we do expect and hope to be able to meet in person when we begin to launch these programs, but we are prepared to offer all of them in a live Zoom format as well, which would be like a simulcast or a live online. So it'll be a very interactive and a very participatory, engaging environment for that as well. And then for the last slide, we have just some contact information. Luigi Pecoraro and I are both working on the open enrollment, so feel free to shoot us your questions on either programs, upcoming programs, or topics you're interested in, and we'd be happy to get back to you on all of those. But this program is now open for enrollment on the website. We have had lots of people already jumping into it, so we're excited to bring it forward. We think it's an important topic for us to be able to support in the Dallas area, and also showcases our analytics program as well. So Hettie's always looking to find companies that will hire her students. So in any event, if you want to put in a short commercial for that, you may.
We graduate a lot of students from our program every year. It's a 9-month program. So a couple of things. The Masters of Science in Business Analytics program, if you have people in your organization that you'd like to get further training, we do actually cover some of this. Jeff Johnston and Brian Smith are two of our adjunct professors that are part of our program. I teach as well as direct the program. So if you ever want to come back to school and get into the MSBA program, I'm happy to talk to you about that. And then as Sherry mentioned, we have students that graduate every year. So if you're building your organization and you'd like students that actually have experience with this, we do that as well. So we can absolutely provide you names and resumes of students. And then I always look for companies to get involved with us every year. So we do a number of things. We do internships with students in the spring. We do a capstone project where we build analytic systems for companies. It's free for you to do the capstone project. We have the students work for you. Anything that we build, you get to keep, and we do sign NDAs. So if you're interested in joining us or coming out and talking to our students, we would love to have you involved. And then the only other thing I would say in regards to this particular program is, if you have seen what you've seen today and you have other things that you think you might like for us to cover in this session that's coming up in November, if you'll actually send a message, you can send it to Sherry or Luigi, and just they'll get it to me, and we can make sure that we take a look at it and see if it's something we want to add to what we're doing. But we would love to have your thoughts about that and what you'd like to see.
Great.
Excellent. All right. Sherry, you want to close us out?
Yeah, so thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you either virtually or physically on campus when we open in the fall. We ended a little bit early today, so we give you a few minutes left of your day and can finish your lunch. And thank you for joining us. And we'll probably host another one of these about 30 days before the program begins, so more of October. And so if you want to share this information with colleagues, we will be sending out the slides at the end of the program. And then you can also look forward to an upcoming webinar in the future. So thank you to our panelists that were here today. And we hope you guys have a great day.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.